So, very happy to have Claire on a live stream with me again. This is my first live stream since I moved to Jordan. There's probably a couple of things I should say. I'll start off with very briefly saying what I do. I'm a Muslim, but I like to provide happiness ideas and classes and a more positive outlook into the difficulties the world faces. That's my short thing, based on Islamic teachings, that is. So it's open to all. Claire, what do you want to say about yourself?
I've written a book called Secular Quranism, and I promote Sharia for non-Muslims, which I call secular Quranism. And I guess people don't really know what to think about it, and the Muslims are sort of thinking I shouldn't be doing it because I'm not Muslim, and I guess non-Muslims also think the same thing. But I think trying to interest people in Sharia, whether they be Muslim or not, or the interpretation of it, will help to make Islam more mainstream. So that's what I'm about.
Great, yeah. And I think, I mean, we come from different, we're on different journeys, starting from different spiritual places. And although my first maybe reaction would be, Claire, you should become a Muslim, but that's might be somewhere further down the journey. But I think if you're following your heart and trying to do the right thing, and I think there's a lot right about what you're doing, then great. Who's perfect? Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm just trying to do my thing. Lots of people criticize me about what I'm doing. Who cares what people say? I mean, I take a little bit of notice, but a lot of people are on the sidelines not doing much, let's say, and they're making their comments. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm just concerned about what am I doing to make the world a better place as best as I know how? And I think you're doing the same, possibly. Would you agree?
Well, I'm just saying, this is the solution. Why can't you look at it? Why can't you just at least challenge me and ask the obvious next question about, maybe how I'm going to get it done, or engage with me in some way. I'm not expecting people to support me and agree with me, but they can't even do that. So that's my frustration. So
Yeah.
when I meet people prepared to have an open mind like you, I'm very grateful.
Oh, and I'm always very grateful to have you on my show because you're always very intellectual, thoughtful, and very funny as well in your own special way. And that also reminds me, I suppose I'm going to say two more things quickly before we get to the actual main content. One is we'll be hopefully continuing the series, which we barely got started on, going through your book. So if you're still willing to do that.
I'd love to.
And the Cool. And the other thing is probably worth saying because people are confused about, okay, now I'm in Jordan. Okay, I'm not doing Speaker's Corner. What am I doing? Am I just doing live streams? So one is, yes, I'm trying to do lots of international live streams, thanks to Claire, who's way more social than I am and puts me in touch with loads of people. But also, I want to start a low-key sort of like what's it called, Speaker's Corner in Jordan. There's a place I'm going to hopefully visit tomorrow where all the foreigners tend to hang out. I'll also be talking to religious people as well. And I'm hoping in some ways it'll be better than Speaker's Corner because Speaker's Corner, there's a lot of who are literally professionals. They do it to make money. And they're not very honest, and it's a lot of pantomime, a lot of game playing, trying to confuse the viewers, and not much honesty, let's say. So I'm hoping possibly I might get more genuine people here because they're not as professional in their. I think the word professional is probably the wrong word. What's a better word? Somebody who's, yes, they are literally professional at debating, but they're not very honest. Is there a better word? I don't know. Just more genuine discussions. Well, let's see what happens. Let's get into the topic. I think I'm going to start with the thumbnail. I struggle always, well, a lot of the time, making the thumbnail. And on the thumbnail, I've got these old, not old school, colonially dressed British people on the left, and on the right there are, let's describe them as savages to make the point more clearer. Okay, or well, they're not wearing many clothes. The picture wasn't great. Okay. And what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say one of the perspectives I'm going to put forward is that people nowadays, I think we're in a phase where we love to complain so that we don't feel we have any responsibility. I think that's what it is about our current state of affairs. And so they love to hate on about just about everybody, including the British when they were colonizers. And I think they're quite unjust in terms of facts as well. But I could be wrong as well. So I wanted to briefly in the thumbnail say, and I'll ask your opinion on this, that you know what, the reason, and I'm trying not to say too much right now, but the reason why the British were the colonizers of India, for example, because they were more advanced, they were more intellectually advanced, and it didn't happen the other way around because the Indians were not. And therefore, if you have a more advanced society taking over a less advanced society, probably the less advanced society are going to benefit in some ways, which I think they did without getting into too much detail right now. What are your thoughts to begin with about that?
It's obviously true, I suppose, that the stronger will try to dominate the weaker. The question, I suppose, is if it's a religious question, is that, well, if Islam is so wonderful, why did it let these Western imperialists take them over?
And I think that's a great question. And when people in Speaker's Corner answer it, I've heard people like Hamza's Den answer it. I think they give a disingenuous answer, which is the West came round and bashed up all of the East, including Muslim countries, robbed them. They got nothing left, so they had to come over to the West. But I'm going to pause and not answer the question right now, because I do try to go through some sort of order. So just so people know, my setup is terrible compared to normal. So my light just broke that I brought all the way to Jordan, managed to get to Jordan without breaking, then I broke it a few minutes ago. And also I also broke my second screen, which is like a big screen so I can see stuff. So I'm looking at my tiny laptop screen, can't really see much about my notes. But I will switch between screens. And yes, so actually, let's go on, continue with that point. But I do like to mention the Holy Quran. I don't like to just say, I'm a Muslim, therefore I'm speaking on behalf of Islam. I think it makes sense to at least say something from the Quran. It might be a little bit vague, but it just gives some of the ideas that I think are, let's say, lacking amongst the Muslims as to and why the Islamic empire declined to the extent to which the Europeans and the Western civilization started taking over their territories, because it wasn't the case when, at some point, let's say, when the Islamic empire was a lot stronger. And so I just quickly mention a verse of the Holy Quran. It says, "And the servants of the gracious God are those who walk on the earth modestly, and when the ignorant address them, they say peace." And you might say, what on earth has that got to do with anything? It's got to do with something in Speaker's Corner, and then it's got to do with a lot more that follows from that. And by the way, that's chapter 25, verse 64, the way I number it, not the way Ahmadi Muslims number it, which is we we respect the Quran enough to say that the first verse is the first verse, not some extra verse. But most people, to make it simple, would think it's verse 63. Anyway, so what has that got to do with anything? I'm going to bring it back to Speaker's Corner and the rise of Muslims in Speaker's Corner and how they're behaving, which is completely at odds with this verse of the Holy Quran. Basically, they're incredibly rude. They're not particularly interested in the truth because they don't listen to people with an alternative perspective. And so let me comment a little bit on the verse of the Quran and then lead on to how it leads to a stronger Muslim empire very briefly. So this verse of the Quran starts off with saying the servants of the gracious God. So if you're a Muslim, you're supposed to be the servant of a gracious God, meaning you should be gracious yourself. Gracious in the sense, the word Rahman means somebody who gives without expecting anything back. So even when you're debating, you're willing to listen, you're there to give. You're not there to just win a debate. You're not there to make money, let's say, necessarily. That's not your prime goal. Okay, and they're also humble, and what you see in Speaker's Corner is complete lack of humility from the Muslims. Like a common welcome is when I get to Speaker's Corner is, oh, here comes the kafir, the disbeliever, and that sometimes that's the best they can do in there. But they say, I like you still, but you're still a kafir, etc. These are really, I get much better reception from non-Muslims and Christians, so that tells you something. And then it says, when the ignorant address them, they say peace. So that can mean a couple of things. First of all, it means a sort of attitude. Like if you don't agree with somebody, you don't have to fight them. Like I just watched a video today where yet another fight was going to start between a Muslim and somebody else. And Muslims have got that reputation. So the idea is if you disagree with them, at least wish them peace. And it could be suggestive of the idea that when you say peace, salam, for a Muslim, that means bye-bye. You can say bye, just leave them alone. And so very quickly, how does that lead to having a great empire? You have to be civil to begin with, I would say. You have to be civil. You have to have to be able to debate calmly and listen to other people's perspectives. And then greater empires begin from there. You can see from the Muslim world where there are benefits from living in the Muslim world like I am in Jordan, but it's not the Muslim clerics that are running things. They're clearly kept out of it. Okay, if they had, like in Pakistan, had any control, the Muslim clerics, it would be hell. And it is hell in places like Pakistan, where everything's collapsing. If you look into any of the politics, it's just disgusting and too much corruption. I've talked a lot. Any thoughts about that?
Well,
behavior of Muslims leading to terrible outcomes generally for the Muslim empire. And maybe I said a few more things, but I'm going to try to stop talking. Go on.
You made the point about being gracious, and it made me think of how hard you would fight the enemy if you thought they were going to be really horrible to you. So, for example, I invade your home, but I say, look, I think you're running in a terrible way, and when I take over, I will just make you pay a bit of rent, but it will be much cleaner, and you'll get all mod cons and whatever, and therefore you should just open your door and welcome me in. And if you believe me, you would say, well, all right then. But if I said I'm going to enter your home and take everything you have and kill everyone in your home, you would fight me harder. So I think it's in a way, a military tactic to say, well, don't fight us too hard because we'll be gracious in victory.
You make me laugh always. It's a very interesting twist of things. And maybe you're referring to possibly some historical events like the invasion by the Muslims of Spain, and which eventually became Al-Andalusia, which followed a very similar narrative, which is the people of Spain at the time were run by the Visigoths, which are completely mental people. Everything was falling apart. And then a tiny small army led by Tariq bin Ziyad, I think. Tariq bin Ziyad. There's a is that we and they took over Spain very easily because basically they were welcomed in. They didn't have to do much fighting. I don't know if you can hear me. Well,
Yes, I'm
okay,
afraid it is rather loud, and
it's all right.
is I was actually thinking of the Roman policy of subduing the proud and sparing the weak. I was trying to think of the Latin version of it, and I can't remember, but that was how imperial Rome, well, how the Romans acquired their empire. Because they said, well, if you fight us really hard, we're going to really punish you. But if you just let us in, we'll be nice, and you'll find that you'll like Roman rule, and you'll be better run than what you were before we invaded. So that was the historical precedent I was thinking of.
Okay, I mean, did you know the story of, I think, Tariq bin Ziyad, who took over Spain and eventually it was known as Al-Andalus? Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I visited Granada, the Alhambra in Granada, very beautiful, beautiful building.
You've done better than me.
Have you visited?
Okay. No, I haven't. Did you know Gibraltar was named after General Tariq, Jabal al-Tariq? Gibraltar. So Jabal means mountain or rock, basically tall rock of Tariq. Yeah. So Gibraltar, it's all kind of mashed together. And a lot of Spanish words of Arabic in them. There's a lot of connection. I don't know Spanish, but apparently that's true. Anyway, so okay, cool. Yeah, so I kind of worry about even the future of England in many ways, because if you look at Speaker's Corner, they're very aggressive, the Muslims, they're taking over. I'm a Muslim. I'm happy in some sense that the Islamic values does help society a lot, creates family values and things like that. But coming back to answering the question about why is it that Muslims are running to the West, the atheist West in many ways. I say the atheist West partly because, the Muslims are not going to an Islamic country, they're going to something very foreign, quite opposite. Why are they rushing towards
to
that?
Sodom and Gomorrah?
That's a good way of putting it, right? And they're not rushing back either. In fact, people I know, when I tell them I was going to Jordan, an Islamic country, they're like, are you sure? Why would you want to go to this backwards developing country? I'm not sure I'm not even sure if that's very accurate, a description of Jordan, but anyway. So people are not in any rush to come back. Go on. Say again?
I've seen pictures of your video of McDonald's and how much nicer the McDonald's in Jordan is compared to the McDonald's in the UK. Or it's very family orientated.
Yes. Yeah, so it's actually quite more advanced in many ways. I mean, I've never seen an interactive table designed for kids, and it was some really good games actually. And then when you put your food there, the game disappears, which is great. You just don't see that, and in England, and we'll probably talk about that why that is the case at the end in the third part, where I talked about why. I'm going to discuss why I've moved to Jordan. But yeah, so okay, Hamza from Hamza's Den, Speaker's Corner, a famous guy there. He says the reason why Muslims moved to the West is because the West has bashed up, ransacked, robbed the East, the Muslim countries of all their oil and everything. And I think that's not a good answer. It's a not a well, it's a disingenuous answer, because why was it possible in the first place for the Muslims to be robbed of all their resources? And the simple answer is that countries are always weak starting from within when they have corruption, and Muslim countries have plenty of corruption. And the corruption is not just at the government levels, corruption at all levels. I would say there's a lot of corruption in Western societies as well, but it seems to be that Muslim countries are far more corrupt, and because they're not following Islam. And it's probably worth mentioning, there's a prophecy of Prophet Muhammad of our times, which has been fulfilled, that Ahmadi Muslims talk about all the time, which is in the latter days, which I believe we're in, Islam would be broken up into 73 sects, which it shift between 72, 73 and whatever at times, but it certainly roughly there. And 72 of the sects.
I can't hear you. You seem to have frozen, Khalid. I don't quite know what to suggest. But I can't hear you. But I can see my avatar pulsating. So I could maybe say a few things, if I could only remember what was on the tip of my tongue before. Oh yes, it is about yes. Okay,
you can hear me.
Yeah, but before that, you'd frozen, so I don't.
Oh yeah. So I think something wrong with my connection or something. But anyways, come back. So very quickly, yes, the Prophet Muhammad prophesied, in short, that most of the Muslims would be hellbound, and that's because they would stop listening to the teachings of the Quran. And you can see wherever Muslims, clerics are in charge of the country, and they're not really in charge of Jordan as the king, and he's got a firm hold and it's quite secular, but it allows social Islam to stay, but it's not controlled by Muslim clerics. Wherever Muslim clerics are in charge, the country goes down the toilet. It turns into hell. The prophecy has been quite accurately, I'd say, fulfilled. There are 73 sects. One of them are the Ahmadi Muslims, and the 72, I would say, are the ones who like to fight and call Ahmadi Muslims not Muslim. So, and Ahmadi Muslims don't call other people non-Muslims either. By the way, I should say, we don't reciprocate their behavior. So the point I'm trying to make is that, yeah, in short, Muslims have gone downhill in their behavior, in their corruption, and they're not following Islam. And so they're running, instead of fixing their own countries, they essentially become materialists and just running towards wherever the money is. I think that's a very fair conclusion to be made there. What do you think?
I suppose it could be a kind of divine plan to send Muslims to the West and make them
I agree with that. Yeah.
To frighten them even, and make them realize how hopeless Christo-liberalism is in protecting them against Muslims. I remember a Muslim telling me that the only way to fight Muslims is with the Quran. And I that was years ago, but I still remember. I remember that, and I think it is probably true that the West no longer has the ability to even stop these immigrants from coming, because the discourse amongst people who complain about the government is immigration. And it's something that their government actively encourages with their neoliberalism and neoconservatism. So neoliberalism is free movement of goods and services and people all over their global empire, and neoconservatism is bombing the countries of Muslims and getting Muslims to go over to the West as cheap labor.
That's interesting. Yeah. There's so many different ways you could approach that. You could also say it's pragmatic in the sense that Westerners are refusing to do the work to run their own countries. And because they don't have a religion, they're getting depressed and killing themselves. If people don't realize the most common way in which young people die now is by suicide in the West. So yeah, you need a workforce that will, they're not just cheap labor, by the way. That's not a fair, I'm not sure if it's a fair characterization. It might be, but they do a lot of the most advanced jobs as well. I mean, I'm not sure if maybe that's wrong, because I did check some statistics. They do run a lot of businesses. I'm not sure if they're just cheap labor, but anyway, yeah, there's definitely, it's very hard to avoid immigration for people who want to say they don't want immigration, and they should just have to look at Brexit and see how much is not working now they have less immigration. So yeah, okay. So I've made the point that I think Muslims are running to the West because they've kind of ruined a lot of the East. I'm not sure if they completely ruined it. That's not completely fair either. But I liked it. You made a really interesting point about it's part of a divine plan, and I would 100% agree with that, because there's another prophecy by Prophet Muhammad that a lot of Muslims weirdly, take literally, and that is the sun will rise from the west in the latter days. And maybe they're just not comfortable with metaphors or something. But anyway, it basically means that the sun, meaning Islam, will rise from the west. Basically, Westerners will accept Islam in large numbers, and it will be as if it started from the west, because I think they will actually think more about the religion more deeply than in the East, where they take everything literally and they don't really think too deeply about the benefits of each of these different Islamic teachings. Let me just have a quick look. So you got a few comments, and I like the participation. Perhaps I consider religious people to be strong and atheist materialists to be weak. I would agree with that. I think it inevitably happens. I'm not hating on atheists or materialists, but it seems to be the case that they suffer more from depression, and that if you follow the science of psychology, you would know why they have to be suffering more from depression. Is because to be happy, according to Viktor Frankl, you need meaning, and you can't have meaning if you're an atheist, because you essentially say there is no meaning because everything was random. Some atheists think they can have meaning in their lives, but actually there's a whole different debate, but you can't really, I don't think. Claire, what is this? I should actually read the comments before I click on them. Okay. I don't know even what that means. You might have to help me. Claire is correct about traitorous elite. Can you help me, Claire? What does that mean?
Well, I guess I'm known for saying that our ruling classes are corrupt and incompetent and never govern in the national interest, and it doesn't even occur to them to govern in the national interest.
Yeah, I suppose they're just self-interested. So they're not, they're just, I think they've got a weird fetish for just being in charge, but they don't realize how unpopular they are. I'm not sure what the benefit is of being, I don't know, maybe there's just money to be made in some ways. But yes, I would agree. They're self-interested and not particularly interested in their country. So I'd agree with that. Okay, so what was the next point I had in mind? So yeah, I mean, I roughly wanted to say, if you're not able, I think a lot of, let's say, intelligence starts with logic and discourse and speaking accurately, speaking truthfully. If you don't have that basic foundation, then everything else really falls apart. When you don't have free speech and intelligent free speech, then you can have free speech and still things will fall apart, because you could be having free speech and people abusing it and people are just cussing each other's mums or something stupid like that. Or the alternative is that you shout each other down or whatever. So when you don't have these foundations of intelligent discourse, you don't have much else. I think you don't have much of science. You don't have much of all the subtle things that make a civilized society. I don't know. What do you think about it? It's kind of like maybe it's a vague theory of mine, but I think it makes sense. You had to have civil society. You need to be able to have civil discourse, and then everything else is layered on top of that for a high-tech, powerful society. What do you think about that?
Well, I thought that the First Amendment is the best Western achievement, because I think up
For the
to
non-Americans, explain First Amendment.
the First
Or
Amendment
maybe.
is the idea that we have the right to free speech and freedom of belief, and um, and this was unprecedented at the time of the American Revolution, because the founding fathers were rebelling against the idea of monarchy. So basically, the American Revolutionary Wars was rejecting monarchy and Christianity, because Christianity was what supported the divine right of kings. And once upon a time, it was the Catholic Church that endorsed the divine right of whatever European monarch was around, saying you have divine right, but they can also withdraw that support by declaring the king to be excommunicated or subject to an interdict, and all kinds of emotional blackmail, I suppose, the Catholic Church would use on European monarchs, until some of them rebelled, and this was called the Wars of the Reformation. But back to the subject of free speech, I think the ruling classes should regard free speech as serving them, because it's only when you allow people to complain about you that you know where you've gone wrong. So you may remember driving, and maybe seeing at the back of trucks, well driven, question mark, and then a number for you to ring if you don't think the lorry is being
Oh, yeah.
particularly well driven. And this is basically what free speech is about. Obviously, people whinge if they're not happy about the government, and it's quite wrong of the government to shut them up, because really they're trying to tell you something's wrong, and if you keep shutting them up and stealing their elections, eventually the penny will drop that there is nothing for them to do but to violently overthrow you. So this is really advice for the elites. You should listen if the people don't like your policies and want to complain. You should
Yeah.
care that they're not happy. But
The
it
problem
seems
did. Yeah, go on, go on. I was going to
I,
say the problem the elites have is they really don't want to care. So I think they have a balancing act of abusing society, and while listening to them a little bit, and maybe for the reason you're giving, so they know how badly they're doing.
yes, they just go through the motions of pretending to listen and care every 4 years. But the rest of the time, when they're in office, they don't give a damn. But
Mm.
a striking analogy was made to me recently. I forget who said it, but yes, it was about the forest fires, and they're talking about climate change and global warming, and they said what the elite are doing is during a heat wave they break the thermometer, and they think they've solved the problem. But I mean, the heat wave, continues. It's still too hot, but they think by breaking the thermometer, they somehow solve their problem, which is what I think that the elites are doing.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I think so. Okay. Just kind of a last point, maybe as well. I'll tell me if it's interesting or not. But what I find, which is really quite opposite to the verse I mentioned about basically being generous and peaceful when discussing, is that in Speaker's Corner, they justify, and increasingly people like Mohammed Hijab, who's a famous Muslim YouTuber, they increasingly justify being rude to their opponents and especially to minorities. Seen lots of examples of that. I mean, I as a Ahmadi Muslim experience that all the time. It's a common thing, to be treated badly at Speaker's Corner with, disrespect and not given. I see when Ahmadi Muslims are debating, they're not barely given a chance to even talk, and they're just told how to behave, and they should be patient and they should listen to these wonderful other YouTubers who know better. And Mohammed Hijab recently did a debate where he was debating atheists, and the atheist said, I'm a bit worried about how you're talking so aggressively. And he said, you've been rude about, I don't know, historically you've been rude in the past, and therefore I'm going to shout and be loud and rude. And there's nothing is in that, in his behavior and the behavior of Muslims, is anything like the behavior of Prophet Muhammad. He would never shout and be rude. He's very calm and softly spoken. So my point there is, if you treat people who you don't like or agree with so much hate and disrespect, then when you run the country, it's not going to run very well. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be, I don't know, it's not a, I mean, what do you think about that? This is just one of the I'm briefly just mentioning one last element of what I think is fundamental to running a country properly, and why the Muslim countries are not run so well, and why they end up being colonized by Western countries, is because they don't have any respect for minorities or people with opinions other than their own. I mean, you could disagree with me. You could say maybe Muslims do respect other people. I think people like Muhammad Hijab sometimes do respect people like very important people, let's say like Jordan Peterson. Somehow he behaves himself, Muhammad Hijab, in certain situations, but largely when he's with his usual audience, he's pretty rude. And I think a lot of Muslims are behaving much like him. So anyway, what do you think? Does that all lead to a worse society if you think it's okay to be rude to everybody and disrespectful? I don't know. What do you think?
I suppose eventually, even if you're not intending to give offense in these theological, religious matters, ultimately what you are saying, even if you're not saying it explicitly, is that, I am right and you are wrong. I am good and you are evil. So, because that's what it really means when we argue about, the rightness and wrongness of things. So I guess we shouldn't expect any better, though we should expect people to use the rules of truth and logic. And I've seen the Christians being quite rude too. I mean, they go on about, the pedo prophet and, Aisha being 9 and, and And I think fundamentally that they are irrelevant points. So, I mean, I would always say, well, you know, if Muhammad didn't write the Quran and he was only the messenger, then he was like the postman. And you know, do you complain about? I think he's um, dropped out. Do you complain about the postman's morals if you know that he has delivered your mail reliably and without interfering with them? Um, so this would be my arg- the argument that I think Muslims can use, and of course they can say, you know, Aisha either was or wasn't 9, and she was really 19, and all that sort of thing. But I think Christians are really quite rude too, and also. Judging from the actions of Hatun Tash, she is deliberately provoking Muslims in order to um, say she was a victim of violence by those, you know, horrible Muslims. But in the times I've been to Speaker's Corner, it's been well quite peaceful and yes, a bit shouty, but I mean nothing. Well, I didn't see any violence, I suppose. So I didn't fear for my safety, and you kind of expect Speaker's Corner to be a bit shouty anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'm overstating some of the aggression. I don't know. I think it just could be better.
Mm.
Okay, so I want to get on to the next interesting part of this, which is this discussion as to what extent were the colonial British, let's see, British colonial powers at least, um, better, or did they provide something useful to, let's say, British India? And the reason I'm talking about it is because this is another point of contention. This is like Ahmadi Muslims are well known for supporting the British government. Well, quite frankly, any government they're part of will be, because I suppose I'll quickly mention a verse of the Holy Quran. I'll read it out quickly. Um, and it says, "O you who believe, obey Allah and obey His Messenger and those who are in authority among you." So basically, that's kind of the levels. You start with God, then His Messenger. If there's any sort of, you might say there should be one and the same thing, but anyway, there's just the different levels of authority, and then those who are in authority among you. So basically, your country and maybe other levels of authority. And if you differ in anything amongst yourself, refer it to Allah. That means just check by the Quran and things like that. And if you are believers in Allah and if you are believers in the last days, so if you truly are fearful of God and you know you're going to meet God at the end of the day, at the end of life, let's say, then you will follow these rules. And this is best and most commendable in the end. The commendable, the word that's been translated is ihsan, which means will produce the best results. And so my brief thoughts on that and British rule in India. First of all, if they're ruling over you, and if any country is ruling you, you're part of any country, try to obey the laws of the country. Because when you don't, you have disaster. You need systems to work. You need to work. You need unity. This is a fundamental teaching of Islam. Islam is very much about unity. This is why people go for the Hajj. One of the reasons the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is to show that world unity. There's many other ways in which Islam tries to promote unity. And one of the ways is follow the rules of your country. Um, so that's one thing. And when you have that organization, which the British colonial powers brought to India, things do work a lot better. They brought a lot of infrastructure through trains and things like that. And they also brought a lot of more legal systems so that actually people had, I would argue, more religious freedom rather than, villagers fighting amongst themselves and deciding outside a legal system. So they brought a lot of things that people who hate on colonial powers, like the British, ignore. For example, they even brought a rule that you can't burn women after their husbands die, which was
Yes, an Indian
Hinduism.
practice.
So, I mean, those are just some thoughts on that. What do you think about? Yes, Hindu practice,
Sati,
Indian practice. Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about that? That the British, and I took.
you're kind of you've frozen and I can't hear you. But I'll try to answer the question as I
British
understand.
government. I mean, the British colonial government did benefit India in some way.
Yeah, yes, I think so. With
Oh, sorry.
English, the English legal system, it perhaps increased the efficiency of the administration of justice and the railways, and God, it has dropped out again. I will continue and say that imperialism can sometimes make the country that has been conquered better run, because the conquering country has a superior political and administrative system, and they leave it behind. So I think the reason why the English were stronger than the Welsh or the Scottish or the Irish was because they were beneficiaries of the Roman conquest. So they took on Roman a Roman sense of hierarchy, a bit, Roman law, and that might have made their society better run. So I don't know if you heard what I said, Carla. Did you? As you faded in and out, you are again.
No, I didn't. No, but I'm sorry about all the connection problems today. I'm trying to figure it out. But anyway, but I don't want to make you repeat it. Make it boring for people. Okay. Let's have a quick look at some of the comments. We've got Politicas, who I was wondering who you were, Politicas, but you said Shalom. Do you know Politicas by any chance?
I think he's Ralph Masilamani.
He seems to be a regular in my.
Yes,
Okay.
I think he's Ralph Masilamani.
What can you tell me about him?
He he was.
Did he tell me about him? Go on.
I think I may have done. I think he was coming. Yes, I think he spoke to you not so long ago. And you, I think he invited you on his channel, and you invited him on his channel. But yes, and he used to go to a Speaker's Corner when he was in London, but he's in Berlin now. Can you hear me?
So let's go whiz through some of his comments. It starts with genetics. I think I was having an interesting conversation with a Jewish friend, was it yesterday? And I was discussing why is it that Jews do so well in terms of Nobel Prize winners, especially in science. They're overrepresented. I think, in terms of billionaires and things like that. And I suggested was it genetics? And he said maybe a bit, but I think, and he made a really interesting, politically incorrect and strong point, which is it's culture. And why it's politically incorrect is because he pointed out, let's say, Black Americans, or even a lot of African, I think more Jamaican, West Indies type people who do really badly. And I don't think it's just genetics. It's a culture of not men taking care of their children, running away from their children, so their children become delinquents, which is statistically true. If you don't have a father at home, you're more likely to become a criminal, and things like that. And so they're not so focused on studies, and the problem perpetuates. And so I think with Jews, as with Ahmadis increasingly, actually, because they've got a tight-knit community focused on intellectual pursuits and business, they help each other a lot. So even Ahmadis help each other a lot in business increasingly. We're very well connected amongst ourselves. For example, I'm trying to start a business selling leather jackets, and then the person who's giving me the leather jackets is like an Ahmadi, and he's trying to help me out as much as possible. So things like that. So yeah, I think it's culture as well.
Being
and
persecuted
community.
probably helps.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as they say.
Yeah. I mean, when you're persecuted, you become more tight-knit. That's interesting. I mean, this is not the main thing I want to talk about, because I want to talk about some other contentious things. IQ. What does this say? This is all over the shop. You need to get some high IQ guests. Sorry about that, Claire. I mean, I should be more high IQ as well, let's say. I don't know. Okay. So let's get on to...
Perhaps you should invite him on your show.
Yes, Mr. High IQ, I'd love to talk to you. I don't know how we've missed each other or something. Claire seems to remember us inviting each other to live stream at some point. But anyway, so they ignore... Yeah, so they're not really learning from the people who are complaining all the time about, oh no, the British did this, British that. Everybody is playing the victim card nowadays. It seems to be fashionable, including being victims of the past, like, oh, the British government robbed us of everything or whatever, and which has some truth in it. But they don't seem to learn. I think this is really important. Learn from what the British got right. What made them so powerful. And if they learn, maybe they would be stronger themselves. So they set up, like I said, all this infrastructure, which, of course, the people who want to complain would say the British did it in a self-serving way, but I think it served everybody. Like I did, as I always do some checks, some of the statistics, 70% of the railways that the British made are still in use, and they brought in legal systems, so there's more order. You need order, okay, and things like that. So and I think I'll quickly move, because I said that already. I'll quickly move forward into the famous thing that people love to complain about. Maybe they should. Maybe I'm wrong in being over relaxed about it. It's the Bengal famine. Okay. And I've actually forgot. Was it rice? Was it rice? I forgot the actual goods that people were missing. Some sort of food, obviously. But very briefly, what all these historians like to ignore, and we had a famous few debates recently between Ahmadi Muslims and a famous Muslim historian on YouTube, Speaker's Corner, called Adnan Rashid or something. He's a historian, and he was saying, oh, the British government is terrible, and how can Ahmadi Muslims respect the British government? And look at the Bengal famine and how many millions of people were killed. First of all, they tend to overestimate how many millions of people were killed. Secondly, they forget to mention that this happened during the war, Second World War, and that they forget to mention it was the Japanese that stopped food arriving to India, which caused the Bengal famine. And they also forget to mention that the British tried very hard to spread food around the country to support them, and they make it out as if that Indians were their enemies. These historians who point out the Bengal famine as an example of how the British were cruel, they make it out as if the British didn't need the Indians. They needed them to win the war. Why would they kill them off or be careless about them? So I think it's a very disingenuous discussion most of the time. I think I like to say I could be wrong. I'm not like an expert in this, but at least we should have a more balanced debate about it or discussion about it. What do you think?
Well, it made me think of an anti-Semite I used to talk to, and he was reading um, whichever book of the Torah it was, and he was saying, see, Joseph caused the famine. But he, because of something about Joseph taking all their stuff and putting it in a granary or whatever. And also I remember talking to um, an ex-Catholic who's now Muslim, but anyway, he was saying that the British deliberately caused the Irish potato famine. um, and so it's like this man you knew saying that the British deliberately caused a famine in Bengal when it was just unfortunate. And I'm sure Churchill didn't want to go out of his way to kill those Indians, or to starve them to death or whatever. And it was the problem caused by the war that resulted in the famine. So I think people, once they've taken a dislike to a particular group, they'll just blame them for everything. It's like, what are you for if you can't blame all our problems on you? To make you our scapegoat, so that the narrative is that we never did anything wrong. It's all your fault, and and it's a very unconstructive attitude to take, because then you never actually fix your problems. You just prefer to
Yes.
blame the groups that you hate.
I like the way Jordan Peterson puts it. He says, tidy up your room first, then worry about the rest. That's paraphrasing, but he's pointing to, and I've noticed the people who complain the most about how the world works, the people who do the most complaining seem to have a lot of problems in their lives, I would say. They're the most alarmist types. Like, oh, yeah, sure, there's World War III, but like, what are you going to do about fixing it? Like, just warn everybody that World War III is on the way and it's terrible. And they love to,
Yes, I mean, conspiracy theorists, I think, use their conspiracy theory to say, see, we'll never win because they always have one over us, so we don't even need to try, and all we need to do is whinge about them. You frozen? So yeah, that's a problem I have with conspiracy theorists, but as well as them being boring. Did I hear something from you, Khalid?
Yeah, no, I'm back again. It's just the worst connection today. Anyway. Yeah, so I mean, sorry about this, really. So what was I saying? Yeah, so I was agreeing with you that people who like to complain usually have a
The
lot
people
of
right at the
problems
bottom
that they don't want to take in their own lives, and they just focus on other.
blaming. The culture of blame.
Yeah.
Because it gives them an excuse to be what they are and to continue blaming rather than to fix their
Being
problems.
victim.
Yes, and then I suppose I say, well, you could do this, you could do that,
Cool.
and they're not
Okay, and
interested.
so just because the connection. Go on.
I think there's a time delay. I was just saying about these conspiracy theories is that they don't want to say or do the thing that is necessary, because they're going to use the conspiracy as reason to assume failure, so they need never try. Which is why with all the complaints in the West by Westerners complaining about their government, not a single one of them actually proposes a solution. And they hate mine. But I have the only solution that that I'm aware of anyway. But yes, they prefer to complain.
Yeah, people love to complain because If they didn't, they'd actually have to take some responsibility, which they think would be too hard, but actually that's where all the fun is. Then you actually have a mission in life rather than just being a victim, which is a really dull and depressing way of living, which is why so many people are killing themselves. Okay, so I want to move on.
You've gone quiet again. Yes, I'm afraid Khaled is frozen. I think people can hear me because I can see my avatar pulsating. Okay, what can I say while we wait for Khaled to come back? So the first topic we discussed was why Muslims prefer to stay in the West, because it's more comfortable. They're economic migrants. Is it a good thing that Muslims are in the West? Obviously, the people who don't like Muslims don't think it is. But we could suppose that God sent Muslims to punish the Islamophobes. Hello again.
Yep, I'm back. Okay, this is. Ugh. I didn't expect it to be really this bad. I had a few problems at some point in a lesson I was teaching. But anyway, now thank you for continuing and filling in the gaps. I won't ask you what you said. I'll listen to it at the end. And I kind of, partly because it's, well, really very much partly because the connection's so terrible. Let's get to, I think, an interesting discussion as to why I moved to Jordan. And people might be questioning it because look, they're saying, what rubbish internet connection do they have? And they might have a point there. I didn't remember it being this bad. I used to teach online before. So something's going on. But anyway, some positives about moving to Jordan. I will very quickly read out a verse of the Holy Quran, and hold fast all together by the rope of Allah, and be not divided, and remember the favor of Allah which He bestowed upon you when you were enemies, and He united your hearts in love, so you may by His grace become brothers. And you were on the brink of a pit of fire, and He saved you. Thus does Allah explain to you commandments that you may be guided. And you might be saying, what on earth has that got to do with anything? Let me very quickly explain. This is something I think very much down your alley, the thing you often promote, is that the way I see it is religion is the only thing that unifies, in short. You always talk about governments need religion to, I'm not sure why, I can't remember, you do make a bit, why do you say governments need religion? I think it's the only really unifying factor because it's based on a higher authority that
Yes, indeed.
And it works.
Yes, because I use this Nazi analogy. So let's pretend that Americans are all Nazis and they know they're supposed to hate Jews and they're never nice to Jews. And then Congress suddenly says, you should all be nice to Jews and marry them and be extra nice to them, and that therefore the Americans would think, oh, but we thought we were people who hated Jews and are never nice to them. So what's going on, Congress, that you are passing all these pro-Jew laws? So it's a kind of marker, a kind of base for people to say these laws that Congress makes is right for us as the kind of people we are. You could be a communist, and then you notice that your that your legislature is suddenly being, very pro-capitalist. So you need some kind of moral system to say, we are the kind of people who always do this and never do that. And so when Congress passes a law that goes against that principle, and that's all it is. So at the moment, the Congress can pass any law it likes and use any excuse that comes into its head, and Jews can't say, oh, but you're not supposed to be introducing transgenderism because Judaism says it's forbidden even for men and women to wear each other's clothes. And then Congress will say, oh, but we're not Jewish, and Muslims can say, have to say, oh, but the gambling is so terrible, and and Congress will say, well, we're not Muslim. So Congress has to be held to account, and there's no other way of holding Congress to account and saying this law that you passed is just wrong for the people we are.
Yes, you need clear red lines, is what I feel like you're saying. Like when you don't have clear red lines, anything goes, and you go down a slippery slope, and a man can be a woman, and a man can race as in the women's race, all sorts of crazy stuff happens. Is that kind of what you're saying? You need some clear red lines?
Well, actually, the other point that is the most important, since you're talking about transgenderism, is that we need to know who we are in order to do the right thing. So if we don't know for men or women, then we won't be doing the right thing. And judging from the way people are complaining about immigration, I think it's because they're not having enough babies, so not enough people are leaving schools who are desirable employees. So these business organizations lobby their politicians to say we must bring in these migrants, otherwise who will run our cafes and serve in our restaurants and whatever. So that is a problem that they refuse to acknowledge. They think they'll just shut people up when they complain about immigration by calling them racist, and just import migrant labor under the very noses of the people who hate them. And you might as well just make your working classes work, and just explain to them. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. You just tell them what the problem is, but everybody's so dishonest. Nobody tells anybody anything because they're so afraid of them getting offended. So the anti-immigration parties never tell their supporters well, you have to marry and have more children and stay together for the sake of the children and be more concerned about, state education and vocational training. But unfortunately for these anti-immigration parties, they're mostly unmarriageable men who are not interested in, family policies and education because, they're not fathers. They don't have children going to school. They don't care about these things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you don't have clear rules, then lots of bad side effects happen, such as feminine men, and feminine men aren't very useful because you need masculine men to be useful men and things like that. I'm going to quickly point out some of the ideas. You talk about identity, and the British have lost their identity, I would say. If you say, what does it mean to be British? Nobody really knows. But it used to be very clear, and I think it used to be based on something to do with Christianity. Like you had higher moral values, therefore you tried really hard in engineering and stuff like that, and you made great things and you made the world a better place. And I'll very quickly try to run through some of the things I've found in Jordan. So they have a very strong idea of identity. They love certain songs that you hear blurring out in their coaches and their coach trips, which I showed in one of my coach trips to the Red Sea. Everybody was singing along and clapping to it. So they have this unity in many ways in terms of clothes. They love their own culture. They love their flag. They love their desserts and food. They really connect around those things. So there's a unity. And then what follows from the unity or connection is the brotherhood, which this verse talked about. And the brotherhood is very important. And you can't rob your own brother, somebody who you feel connected to. You cannot disarm. So the point I was going to make is when also in the McDonald's that there was I made a video about. There's so much that that wasn't shown, and one of the things was people were just leaving their belongings around. So I was waiting. I went downstairs and I saw that on one table there's a wallet, and another table there's a fancy bag, like the. Do you know Guess, the brand Guess?
How do you spell it?
Guess, Guess.
Oh, right. No, I haven't heard of
It's
it.
a really expensive brand, some lady's handbag, and that was left around as well. And then eventually somebody comes back and they did. You wouldn't see that in England. And part of that is because of the connection between people. You see that a lot. Like I worked in a school where it was normal for kids to leave their bags around, and they'll leave it and come back. And I said, "Don't you think somebody's going to steal it?" And they say, "Steal what?" Kind of like they don't. So there is some sort of brotherhood connection, and the way they even talk to each other, like they say, "I love you" all the time. That's their normal way of talking. They Habibi, I love you, whatever. I found that very strange at first, but then I got used to it. They invite each other to their houses and things like that. So there's a lot of connection. There's a lot of unity. I think that from the unity you get more connection. And was there anything else that and of course it's very, then it leads, when you think everything's about family and your brotherhood and sisterhood, then you do see all the sort of family related things, like the kids are just running around the restaurants and nobody cares. And Jordanians particularly, that like when later on in that same McDonald's, the ladies were all having their little party, and the kids were somewhere else completely, and nobody cared because they thought they would be safe. Nobody thought that their children would be kidnapped, and the children take care of each other. And that's very common sort of thing, way of thinking. Like one of my teacher friends from Jordan, I remember him saying, like, yeah, it's normal for him to pick some kid out in the public if they're skating and say, go and take my daughter and teach her to skate, and then we will just carry on talking with the adults. It's a very, very different way of thinking about things, thinking about each other, I suppose. So I think there's all these kind of ideas, and one of the reasons why I like Jordan. But I suppose one big thing I want to say is, when people, what I want to say to people who are shocked that I moved to Jordan is that their way of analyzing is so messed up. Like, the West is the most depressed place in the world. Like, literally, statistically, that is a fact. So why would you stay there? Like, just because there's potentially more money? And where is that money coming from? It's all borrowed, printed out of thin air, blah, blah, blah. There could be lots of structural reasons, but they have better internet, let's say, for example, and some other systems or something. But I think you're missing something huge if you're not counting happiness. Like, people in Jordan are far happier because they've got families, stuff like that. Statistically, people in the West are really depressed, and it's just getting worse. Why would you not take that into account? What do you think? Should you not take into account happiness?
Of course we should, but I suppose because capitalism is what is how they measure their success. It just doesn't even figure, because they measure their success in GDP, in
Yes.
national income.
Including the Muslims, though. Including the Muslims are counting their success in money. That's probably why they don't question it. I think they become materialists and they don't admit to it.
I think there should be another way of measuring national well-being. I know they talk about this sort of happiness index. I was looking at it yesterday myself. Are you aware of it?
Yeah, I
Where they
know
measure
there's some
which
country that
countries are the
measures it.
happiest.
Yeah, there's some sort of, not Tibetan, but somewhere around that, there's a country that measures the happiness index or something each year.
Yeah. And they're saying Scandinavian countries are the happiest, but the thing is, we know that 6 months of the year they're in a kind of twilight zone, and we know that They kill themselves
I don't
a
agree
lot.
with. I don't think Scandinavian country. I've seen the statistics and how they measure it, and I think it's purposely trying to not include Muslim countries. So, for example, they measure how many pubs there are, how many people. So that just means how much alcohol you drink. I think they're very depressed. They are a very depressed people, a very not social people. So there's no chance that they're the happiest countries. I think it's messing with the statistics. Like they're well known for keeping away from each other. I've got relatives who live in Sweden and things like that. I think it's just a lie. They're not happy countries at all, in my opinion.
And I propose a better and more objective way of measuring national well-being, and that is to have the statistics of murder per capita, divorce, suicide, unnatural deaths, road traffic accidents, divorce, that sort of thing. Things that everybody will think, oh, it's a bad thing. They're not going to, say, oh, murder is a good thing. Oh, more, death by, road traffic accidents, lethal accidents. That's a good thing. I mean, these are things that everybody, who are honest and reasonable will say it's a bad thing that, they're more illegitimate offspring, more divorces, more suicides, more, reported incidents of crime, So I think that should be the way in future of measuring national well-being, So
Yeah, I
rather than
agree. And measuring GDP as how well your country is doing doesn't really make sense if you're printing loads of money. It's just like printing
exactly.
money. So it's not really a measure of anything. And I would say, interestingly, I think the Western countries have the most debt in the world. So they're technically the poorest countries in the world. I don't know. What do you think? They're like
Well, yes. I
trillions
mean,
of
if you're
debt.
minus, whatever, it just means that the next generation is going to be taxed horribly, and it will discourage incentive because you're not going to work hard if you think 50% of it is going to go to the government, and you're not happy with the way the government spends your money. You'll say, well, I'm just not going to work then, rather than give it to you. I'll just make sure I stay below the tax threshold. And actually, there is an Islamic rate of tax. It's 20%, isn't it? Under Corbyn's.
Say that again. Islamic what? 50%?
There's an Islamic rate of tax. I know it says it applies to booty. It's a fifth, isn't
So
it?
you mean the zakat or something? Yeah, I mean it's incredibly low. And
Yeah,
it
so a
only taxes
20%
wealth.
flat rate income tax would
Oh
be.
no, I think it's even like 2.5%. So completely ridiculous. I don't know how they manage it, but it's maybe if you spend money well, but I don't think it's 20%. I think it's like I've heard
I can find you
maybe something else. Yeah, we'll look it up.
there is a verse that actually says it, but I mean, I think the zakat is only in the hadith. It is mentioned, but I mean, I would
Oh no,
interpret it
zakat
to.
is. I'm sure zakat's in the Quran, but like the amount maybe is debatable. I think, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be charity, and if it's charity, then you shouldn't. You shouldn't specify any amount because charity is just about what you're prepared to give.
Yeah, I suppose it's a different kind of charity because it's charity to spend on poor people through the government, which is you could just call it tax, I suppose, but that's what tax is for, isn't it?
Well, it's
But
compulsory.
anyway,
Yeah, I
yeah.
posted the link to you in case you're interested
Okay,
in this
thanks.
comms thing in the
Yeah.
private chat.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay, and lastly, and the connection's staying so well for the last few minutes. Lastly, I think the reason why this is, I think, very interesting. The reason why many Muslims love being in the West because they've adopted a slave mindset of becoming dependent on the welfare system as much as possible. I've seen that a lot. And I think that's going to become the case. I think the government's almost doing it purposely now by raising the cost of living so that then you need vouchers and whatever, and they're making your money completely valueless because through inflation, and your salaries are never going to keep up with the incredible inflation we have at the moment, except unless you're like a billionaire or something. So I think there's something interesting happening. So Muslims, or a lot of people, becoming developed a slave mindset of becoming happy to get a council home or something like that, and take advantage as much as possible of the welfare state. And on the other side, the government is actually encouraging that behavior, because it's making life impossible to live on, your salary to live on, so that you become dependent on the system. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Like, have you
Well,
ever heard of the people becoming more dependent and happy to be dependent on the welfare system and anything like that?
well, you may know that I support the reintroduction of slavery because it was the ancient form of the welfare state. Because basically in the olden days when there wasn't a welfare state and you haven't got a roof over your head, you can't buy any food, you'd be left with starving on the street. So if you're prepared to work just for food and for shelter, you're that slave. And that's how people who could still work even though they even though they had no money, there would be a place for them. But now,
So I mean,
what you have,
you don't try to make your ideas palatable, do you? You could have said that the government's willing to take you on as a civil servant rather than as a slave.
civil slave, don't give me
Civil,
civil slave.
but it's a good deal. You don't have to make it sound so bad. But anyway, yeah.
No, because I mean, people will just idiot accuse me of all that, but really and also my point is that neither the Bible nor the Quran forbid slavery. So the Americans and the British had no business banning it, and they banned it to their own detriment. Because I don't know if you've heard of workfare. Have you heard of workfare?
No.
So it's basically the idea that if you want some kind of benefit, if you're getting state money, you have to somehow work for it. And they try to acknowledge. I mean, okay, they tried to do it, but they found that it's actually more expensive to have people supervising these reluctant workers. And they thought, oh, it's just cheaper to pay them to stay at home and watch TV and do whatever they want, than actually hire people and say you must do this work and that work, and and then they don't even turn up, and you have to go and look for them, that sort
Yeah.
of idea.
Yeah. Okay. So if they were slaves, they wouldn't have a choice. Is that kind of what you're saying? But they would just do the job properly or something like that.
Yeah, and okay, my idea of humane slavery is that there would be the Department of Work, Pensions and Manumissions. So the property of the slave resides in the state, in the government. The government actually owns you, and it starts an account for you, and it hires you out to people who want to, who want your services, and they would pay the government for your services, and there would be whatever amount you need to manumit yourself, and then and then you manumit yourself. And then there would be slave visitors to visit the slave, to see that the slave is working properly and that government property isn't being damaged and, is being treated well. And that would be the system I propose, a system of humane slavery.
And where did you get this idea from? It sounds like the idea of the time of Joseph. It's not really exactly, it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's kind of opposite to the Islamic idea. So, I mean, do you know the story of what Joseph did? Like, he essentially
worked his way
encouraged
up.
people. But he also, at one point, he managed to get everybody to willfully become slaves of the government, and then he set them all free anyway. But everybody was willing to do it because he was such a kind leader, and he provided everybody their basic needs, where they're not getting that from when they were not getting their needs through real slavery, through cruel masters. Do you know what I mean? There's the slavery through the government, which is benign and takes care of all of your needs. And then there's the capitalistic slavery, which is just abusing the slaves. And I don't know if you know that story, maybe.
No, I
but
don't. Please tell me what system he was using.
So it was, I mean, it was pretty long-winded. I'm trying to remember exactly the whole thing. Basically, I mean, most people know the basic story of the success of Joseph was eventually he was allowed to rule Egypt because he was so wise, and he got them through a famine, and it went something like this: the rich people lost a lot of they couldn't survive because they didn't invest. I can't remember the exact details, but he did
Mm-hmm.
very well, and everybody ended up becoming dependent on him. And it was
Mm-hmm.
his game plan to enslave people temporarily and then free them all. But I want to say the Islamic idea is quite different, because there's a million different excuses to free slaves, but the solution to the problem is in the Islamic system, and I'm not sure if you think it will work, but you give everybody their basic needs. There's the 4 basic needs in the Quran. I think it's shelter, protection from the sun. It's described as um, water, food, and clothing, I think. So your basic needs are all covered, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
like something you'd be excited about. So once so that the good thing about that is you're protected from capitalistic slavery, like, working for Amazon where you're not allowed a toilet break. I'm not sure how true that is, but do you know what I mean? So you're protected from doing jobs that are basically slavery, because you don't have to work, but you kind of do want to get more than just staying alive. Um, yeah. What do you think about that? Would
Well,
that
the thing
work?
is, um, somebody was saying, oh yes, I think it was Shahid Bolson. He was saying that the Islamic um, method of slavery was actually career guidance and career training, and that these slaves were being trained for things. So it wasn't this terrible thing that they were, making it out to be. Because I think Westerners, when they think of slaves, they think of picking cotton, and and actually the Roman form of slave was that actually you could be a slave tutor. Just imagine, Khaled, a slave
Hmm.
tutor, but, because you just have to pick up your master's kid from school and carry his bags or something, his books or something, and then you'd have to teach him, and that sort of thing. So it doesn't actually mean that you'll be working in mines until you're dead and picking cotton until you're lashed to death, or
Yeah, and
you
in
can
Islam,
be.
slaves are supposed to eat the same food as their masters, often wear the same clothes as their masters, sit with their masters on the same table. Even, yeah, if you're not allowed to hit your slave. Basically, there's a million excuses to set your slave free. So you're better than your slave. It's just the slave. You got the slave under unfortunate circumstances, like there was a war, and you had to take them slave because you wanted to demonstrate that, because they had the intention of doing the same to you. But if they were not going to do the same to you, you wouldn't do the same to them. You're just showing them, don't mess with us. We're not too soft. But at the same time, the Muslims are incredibly kind to their slaves.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
all right. So, I mean, I suppose we've got a few comments left from William Branch. Do you know William Branch? He's not the Muslim, is he? The convert to Islam, William. Was that different William?
I think he comes from Paul Van der Clay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So he says something, I don't know. Let's just finish off with half poor dig holes, other half fill those holes. I'm not sure what to say about that. But he does agree about JFK. Is JFK the new guy? The one
I
who's
think it was.
running for election? Is he, or
I,
is
I think
he?
I think it was
Who's
the
in? Go on.
assassinated one,
Oh, okay, yes.
but
Who's
I'm not
the?
sure.
But the
That's
new guy
Robert
is also a
Kennedy.
J, though,
Robert
isn't he?
Kennedy.
Robert. Yeah, I thought he was John for
It's
some reason. I don't know
the
why.
Republican candidate.
Yes, that's the one. I'm getting mixed up. So okay. So yeah. So yeah, we agree. GDP is misleading. So it's not new. Okay, cool. Any last words, Claire, to finish
Um,
this off?
Yes, I mean, I suppose I was just going to say that, if Islamophobes are complaining about Muslims, it could be God's divine plan to punish them for for not being Muslim. Just my little joke.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, I'm half kind of thinking of something else. I missed your joke. So
Okay.
Islamophobes. Go on, say it one more time. Go on.
Okay. It could, I mean, Muslims in the West could be a divine punishment for
Yeah.
Westerners not being Muslim, because I don't see how they're going to actually get their acts together to solve all their problems without being, becoming Muslim, or taking on um, Quranic principles of governance. So either way, they're forced to. I mean, they're reminded every day of their problems and how it could be solved, until they,
Yes.
finally take the decision
I,
to
I,
do
I I
the
think
right thing.
that's how God works. I think that's actually how God works. Like, I think there's a lot of poetic justice and funny ways in which God teaches us things. So, for example, the West is always talking about how women in Islam are, persecuted and stuff like that. And then most converts to Islam are women in the West. I think God plays games like that to teach us a lesson in different ways. So I agree. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Claire. Sorry about all the connection problems. Let's see what happens next time.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Take care.
All right. Take care. Peace. Bye.
Bye.